This is the Erasing Shame podcast, and today I'm joined by Nôn Wels, and he is the podcast host of You, Me, Empathy podcast, and also part of launching a new project, a new line of workshops and all kinds of things called the Feely Human Collective. And we're going to talk about feelings, and this being the Erasing Shame podcast, specifically about shame. And so it just so happens that that we started our podcast in January of 2018, as you did.
Oh, wow. That's excellent. How serendipitous.
Oh, what a coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
Well, we're in season 4, so we break it up into seasons with different co-hosts. And this season, we're taking a journey around the world, a journey of healing around the world. And we try to facilitate a space where people can talk about different aspects of shame, because when there is silence, then shame festers and hurts us in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah.
So I'll start with a question. What do you think of when you hear the word shame?
First of all, thank you for having me, DJ. I appreciate it. Shame. Yeah. The first thing I've been thinking about this all week. The first thing that comes to mind when I think about shame is really the sort of old story, or the old story that I've been holding on to, I think, which is this long running underpinning belief that I don't deserve love. And that's like a piece of me that I've held since really childhood. And at times I feel very, I feel shame about it. I feel like it's something that intellectually I know it's not true, right? But it's funny how feelings can be, and how these beliefs, how these sort of limiting beliefs that we have can be and exist in our lives. It's like they can exist so strongly on the emotional level, yet on the intellectual level, of course, we see it and we understand it. We understand why it's there, and yet it rules us. So that's kind of like the feeling of unworth, feeling of unlove. That's what I think about when I think about shame.
Yeah, and I've experienced a lot of shame in my life as well, and something I've held on to perhaps a bit longer than you have. I'm age 53, and you look a bit younger.
38.
So it's 38. So it's funny when you say you've held on to it for a long time. And as you explore the world of feeling through your blog and through your podcast, shame seems to be the one that's hardest to talk about. Why do you think that is?
I think oftentimes it's so personal, right? Like I just like shared with you, DJ, that it's something that, I think stems from childhood, right? And those are often coming from, I mean, at least for me, I can speak for myself. It comes from childhood trauma. It comes from growing up in an environment where at times I felt scared and unsafe, right? And when something's so personal, I think it's sometimes hard to talk about, because it's either we don't know how to talk about it, right? We don't have the language or the tools yet, and then also it's just so deeply personal, and we feel, I mean, at least I feel like controlled by it at times. Like I'm someone who knows that, sure, I'm loved, but I also like there are times where I'm just controlled by this deep shamed belief that I don't deserve any of that love. And I sometimes even take actions to sort of facilitate that limiting belief. And it's just such a hard thing to come to terms with, because it's so, it's just so deeply personal and hard to shake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what we've been discovering, that it's just really hard to talk about. And the more we talk about it, we're beginning to get our hands around it. But
Absolutely.
shame does fester in silence, and we have a reluctance to share. It is personal because it shows our weakness. It shows our discomfort with ourselves.
Sure.
And just before this call, I looked up that movie that really helps us to understand feelings and emotions, I think. The Pixar movie Inside Out, you recall that movie?
Oh yeah, I know that movie has been referenced on You Me Empathy countless times. I love that movie.
Yeah, and I'm thinking as we're talking, I need to make that a regular ritual where I watch it at least once a year because it gives me a very uh, vivid and I think potentially healthy way to process my emotions
Hmm.
um, and in my relationship with others as feelings come up because feelings are part of the human experience.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
I grew up in a Chinese family where feelings were just not expressed or processed.
Right.
And you can imagine what happens with that. What is your
Absolutely.
family background ethnic wise?
I mean, traditional sort of white hippie parents, but obviously, I'm not growing up in the same sort of cultural background that you are, DJ, but um, certainly, I grew up in an environment where I didn't feel safe to talk about my feelings necessarily. It could have been for different reasons, you and I, but um, you know, I think that's a huge, like, safety is such a huge part of like finding this, and that's why, like, erasing shame is so important. Is that creating these safe spaces for us to talk about feelings, because as that Pixar movie shows very beautifully, Inside Out, it shows us that all feelings are truly valid, right? And they're guideposts for us. They're not they're not all of us. They don't, control our identity or anything, but we do need to take notice of them, right? And anger comes up, or sadness, or whatever. Like, these are all valid. We just have to kind of be curious about them, and look at them. And the more we kind of shut them down or put them into boxes, I think I think truly unhealthier we're going to be, because we're not addressing where they're coming from, right? We're not
Hmm.
wanting to get to the bottom of, like, okay, what's going on here? And sometimes it's nothing, but we have to ask that question to figure that out.
Yeah, and in addition to that, not only is there times where people shut down their emotions, there's also times where people let them explode and let them go out of control, which is
Sure.
just as destructive. So
Yeah.
on the one hand, you destroy, hurt people on the outside, or you hurt yourself inside, or both
Yeah.
potentially. But uh, even though
Absolutely.
both of us grew up in very different family contexts, it sounds like feelings were not um, processed in a safe manner, in a healthy manner during our childhood or even into our teenage and young adult years. Uh,
Right.
why do you think that was for you?
I mean, I think for me, and not putting anything on, my parents or anything. I think I was, and am, I should say, I know I am a very sensitive person. And and also, I struggled with depression and anxiety growing up, and I wasn't aware of it until into my 20s. It took me that long to figure out. And that sort of level of like denial of self and ignoring of self resulted in a lot of, like, stuff that um, a lot of self-destructive behavior, a lot of um, self-harm and suicidal ideation, and even anger on my part, and acting out and doing stuff that I look back on and I'm just like, God, what are you doing? Just being a punk kid. And I think it all came out of this um, inability to look inward, because I had built this sort of guard around my heart, because I didn't feel safe all the time, and I was scared of my dad and things like that. Um, but that can happen, right? Like, that's the danger of it.
Hmm.
So I think I'm just, like, very sensitive, and so
Hmm.
and my dad was very uh harsh and
Mm,
a bit of a tyrant and
mm,
yelled and that kind of him and I were like oil and fire in that way,
mm.
or oil and water. I don't know what the proper
Or,
phrase is, but like,
well, he'll be the
we
fire part.
yes, exactly. We didn't mesh well in that way. Yeah.
Well, I've discovered that I'm on the sensitive side also, and
I sense that about you.
I didn't discover that was a important part of me
Mm.
more than I thought until I was well past college, like
Mm-hmm.
into my young adult years.
Yeah.
That I could no longer hold it in, and it was affecting me consciously
Yeah.
because I was able to grow up and get good grades and go to engineering school. So I knew how to use the left side of my brain,
Right.
but there's this whole other half of me on the right side that needs life, that needs to get
Yes.
out. And if it doesn't get out, then it's going to eat me up on the inside, and that's what happens.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
part of my healing journey was to get my brain reconnected and to begin articulating what my feelings were. And that took a long time with therapy, talk therapy, as well as medication. I was diagnosed bipolar, and it sounds like you've had your own journey as well. What's a good episode that I can link to in the show notes that people get more of your backstory? Because I certainly want people to get to hear that if this resonated with them.
Oh gosh. I've I'm over 100. We're at like 112 episodes, so it's
Uh huh.
I think there was episode maybe 78 is one where I shared sort of more in detail about my story. I think that was the one. Um, I think like I hear you telling your story, DJ, and explaining a little bit about your background. It makes me happy and it gives me hope, and it also reminds me that like um, there's such a cultural pressure to be on a certain path and be on a certain timeline and achieve certain things. But
Hmm.
the reality is that we, each of us individually, are on our own path and we have
Hmm.
to go at our own timeline. And, I think we put shame on ourselves, even in like that, even in the timeline of things, right? Like
Hmm.
you were saying, like, I know you weren't putting it on yourself, but like I can hear other people's voices putting shame on themselves when they say, oh, it took me this long to whatever, right? But the reality is it just takes us as long as it takes us, right? And I wanted to give you that grace and kindness, because I know that I've been hard on myself in my own sort of journey, and thinking back and like, gosh, like I wish I would have gotten my act together, right? Sooner. And look where, we play that guessing game, but that's just that doesn't that doesn't get us anywhere. That's a an effort that's not going to bear any fruit.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's good encouragement.
Yeah, of
That's a
course.
healing balm. So thank you. Yeah. The Yeah. So it's been quite a journey to get healthy and stay healthy. Um, and uh, as you're into the 100+ episode, you're starting to do some new things as well. So tell us about Feely Human. How is it that you've taken your experience and used it to motivate yourself to help other people through this thing called Feely Human and the You Me Empathy podcast?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So I started Yumi Empathy, like you said earlier, January 2018, to really be a safe space for people to open up and share, just like erasing shame is. And I, throughout the past 2 years, I've learned so much, and I've connected with such amazing people, and with like beautiful hearts and beautiful stories and such courageous stories. And also like amazing minds that like the knowledge and the experience, like I want to learn it all. I want to like tap into that, right? And it's just such a gift that I can show up and meet all these amazing people, and then the listeners can connect with their stories, and there's like that empathy there. And so when I started thinking about that and what Yumi empathy means to me, and I wanted to do more, like I wanted to create an environment where we're not just connecting over the airwaves, we're also connecting elsewhere, and we're providing each other means to even collaborate and educate ourselves. And so that's when I started thinking about the Feely Human Collective, which is essentially, and as you said, I'm crowdfunding right now. It ends March 1st. You know, I'm crowdfunding the first phase of it, and the first phase is essentially this: it's a website where people can go and take workshops, and those workshops are about really um, educating and instilling in us the sort of the wonders of empathy, vulnerability, and emotional wayfinding as sort of core tenets of the human experience and mental health and recovery and all these things. So workshops. There's also going to be a journal where people can, write and share their stories. There will also be a new episode of Yumi Empathy on Fridays, where people can apply. Anyone can apply to be on the Friday episodes, and then there will also be a sort of a shop to kind of like, you know, celebrate your feely humanness, and all that money goes back into the business. And that's kind of like the sort of core of phase one. And then later phases, I'm bringing all of that stuff offline. Like I want to do workshops in businesses and schools, and workshops really about like getting us to think about mental health in different ways, but also like building these tenets of seeing how empathy can play a role in your mental health, and how vulnerability plays a role, and how emotional wayfinding plays a role. So workshops in businesses and schools. I want to do retreats, a live storytelling series, and a bunch of other like big plans that are probably years down the line because it's just me running this thing. But that's kind of the vision. And I keep telling myself that no matter how much I make in the crowdfunding, I'm going to make Feely Human Collective happen because it's a deep, deep passion of mine. And I believe in the vision of it. I believe in the structure. And so, yeah, it's just about like bringing more empathy and more feelings and more vulnerability into the world in a way where we're actually educating ourselves and collaborating and learning from each other, and meeting online and meeting in person. And that's the vision of the Feed the Human Collective. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And I encourage our viewers and listeners to check that out at knownwels.com. That's spelled NONWELS.com. And of course, we'll have links in the show notes at erasingshame.com.
But if they go to Feely Humans, plural, feelyhumans.co, that'll redirect to the crowdfunding campaign.
Okay, whatever one of those URLs is easier for you to remember, go to that. Erasingshame.com also will have links. I know some people are listening audio-wise and some watching video-wise. It's wonderful that you want to bring more empathy into the world. It's such a important piece of our human experience to become whole and to not be weighed down with shame and feelings that we don't know how to manage because it can derail us. And I think it's beautiful that you're doing this outside of the medical profession, because so much of it right now is locked in to behavioral health or talk therapy or medication. And those are very helpful and those are very powerful things, but it's more of a spectrum. It's not whether you have a diagnosis or you don't have a diagnosis. We're all human and we all have growth areas where being more empathetic and being more in touch with our feelings and feeling our feelings is a good thing.
Yeah.
And you're creating some programs and places for that.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
amazing.
it's truly, it's about connection, really. It's about, recognizing, like you said, DJ, that we are all truly humans. That's what we are. I say we're all feely humans, but we're all humans at the base, right? And let's start there. And with things like empathy, like I've learned to, like, empathy has been crucial in my like recovery and mental health. And I believe it can be for others as well. It just takes some practice, and love, you know.
That's the other piece I wanted to highlight is it takes practice and real time experience.
Hmm.
I think that's why we need other people to empathize with us and to hear us and to mirror back and to
Absolutely.
feel with us, because just reading a book is helpful, but it's kind of one dimensional.
Hmm.
It can reinforce your own self-talk, and it doesn't break your thinking pattern because it's just your brain processing words on a page. And so what you're doing is so important and so valuable. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. One more thought that I wanted to mention earlier, but we have one more thought, one closing thought. So
Sure.
both of you are men. So we're both on the in that category, perhaps called sensitive men.
Mm.
And our mass media and movies and film and television have bombarded us with this image of the alpha male and machoism and men don't cry, and there's other sayings in our American culture that reinforce the suppression of feeling.
Hmm.
Uh, my hope is that what we're doing is showing a different picture and a fuller picture of what it means to be a man. And what do you say to people that throw those stereotypes at you and say hurtful things?
Well, first I chug a beer and crush it on my head.
There you go. That's a manly thing to do.
And then I pump some iron. No, I'm just kidding. It happens, and people ask me all the time about, what is it like being a man and talking about feelings, and I say that mildly flippantly because I understand what they're trying to get at, and they're speaking to the stigma that exists. They're speaking to the cultural norms that exist. But I'm less interested in those cultural norms because the more I think about them, the more energy I, you know, take responding to those types of things, the less I'm putting energy into myself being a feely human and just um, acting the way I am, right? And that's an impact on others in and of itself, right? Like people can see me being a sensitive, feeling man, human, um, and that's inspiration or empathy, whatever you want to call it, in and of itself. But it's frankly, that's all I know how to be. Once I started being this way, and it naturally coincided with like recovering from an eating disorder and going on medication and going to therapy and exploring my heart. Once I started being that way, that's the only way I could be, because that it's the best way. It's just the most fruitful for me, and it's the most connecting, and it's the most empathetic, and it's the most true and authentic to who I am as a human. So, you know, I guess that's what I would respond with.
Well, very well said. Thank you, Nôn Wels. Thank you for joining us on the Erasing Shame podcast.
Thank you for having
And
me.
be sure to check out his crowdfunding project as well as his podcast at feelyhuman.co. That's FeelyHuman.co. And of course, there's show notes at erasingshame.com. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We got a super fan that's working on getting us on Spotify, our final frontier, and we'll be everywhere for you to share and to join us on this journey of healing around the world. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.